When I think back to the years that shaped me most, I realize they weren't marked by milestones like graduation, or even the first time I fell in love. They were marked by a secret I carried, a secret I never asked for, one that became a silent weight in my chest for years. To understand that secret, you have to understand the bond one shared with my father. Growing up, he was more than just a parent. He was my closest confidant, the person who noticed when I was quiet, who sat beside me in silence when I didn't feel like speaking. I admired him in a way that children do when they believe their father is larger than life, invincible, untouchable. Our family was ordinary from the outside. My mother was the quiet, steady presence who kept everything together. She cooked, she worked, she managed the details that made our home feel alive. My father was the kind of man people liked easily, charismatic, thoughtful, someone who could light up a room without trying. Together, they seemed balanced, and I never thought to question their marriage. At least, not at first. The first time I noticed something unusual, it was so small I almost brushed it aside. My father had come home late one evening, smelling faintly of a perfume that wasn't my mother's. I remember the sharpness of it, floral but heavy, the kind that clung stubbornly to fabric. At the time, I told myself it must have been from a co-worker or a crowded elevator. I didn't want to imagine anything beyond that. He smiled at me the way he always did, ruffled my hair, and asked about my day. Nothing about him suggested guilt, nothing suggested I should worry. But once you notice something, you can't unsee it. Over time, the details began to pile up. The late-night phone calls he would take outside, speaking in a hushed voice. The sudden excuses about work emergencies on weekends when I knew his office was closed. The way he started putting more effort into his appearance, pressing his shirts, wearing cologne even when there wasn't an occasion. To anyone else, these changes might have looked like harmless quirks, but to me, they formed a pattern. I didn't tell anyone. Not my mother, not my friends, not even myself in words I could fully accept. I just tucked the observations into the back of my mind, pretending they weren't there. And yet, part of me began to feel different around him. Still loving, but cautious, as though I was standing at the edge of something dangerous without realizing how deep it went. The moment that truly shifted everything came late one night when I passed by his phone, left face up on the kitchen counter. A message lit up the screen. I shouldn't have read it, but my eyes caught the words before I could look away. It wasn't explicit, but it was intimate in a way no message from a colleague should be. My stomach dropped, and in that instant, the vague suspicions I had been pushing aside transformed into something real. I knew, without needing proof beyond that glowing screen, that my father was hiding something from all of us. That night, I couldn't sleep. I stared at the ceiling, replaying every little moment I had ignored before, fitting the pieces together into a picture I didn't want to see. What unsettled me most wasn't just the betrayal of my mother, it was the fact that now I was a part of it. I had seen what I wasn't supposed to see. I knew something I could never unknow. And though I hadn't said a word to anyone, that knowledge itself created an invisible tie between me and my father. A secret, silent but heavy, that settled between us without either of us acknowledging it. From that moment on, I carried it alone. I didn't confront him. I didn't warn my mother. I just moved forward, pretending everything was normal, though I knew nothing was the same anymore. What I didn't realize then was that this was only the beginning of a long journey, one that would test not just my loyalty, but my understanding of love, trust, and betrayal. After that night, the world around me didn't look the same. On the surface, everything carried on as before, family dinners, school routines, weekends together. But underneath, I felt like I was carrying a weight no one else could see. Every time my father spoke, every time my mother laughed at something he said, I found myself studying him, searching for cracks in the mask he wore so easily. The confirmation I had dreaded came one afternoon when I least expected it. I was supposed to be meeting a friend, and I stopped by a cafe on the way. Through the glass window, I saw my father sitting at a table with a woman I didn't recognize. She wasn't a colleague. There was nothing professional about the way he leaned toward her, the way his eyes softened when she laughed, the way their hands brushed across the table and lingered just a moment too long. My breath caught, and I froze, unable to step inside or walk away. That image burned itself into me. I knew then that the message on his phone hadn't been a misunderstanding. There was another woman, and my father was in love with her, or at least deeply entangled in something he couldn't explain away. When he finally noticed me standing outside, our eyes locked. The shock on his face was brief, quickly replaced by a calm expression, but it was too late. I had seen it. He knew I had seen it. In that silent exchange, something shifted between us forever. Later that night, he knocked on my bedroom door. I pretended to be asleep, but he sat on the edge of my bed anyway. His voice was low, careful, as though he were speaking to someone older than I really was. He didn't apologize, and he didn't explain. Instead, he said, "Sometimes things are complicated between adults. You'll understand one day. Please, don't say anything to your mother. It would only hurt her, and I don't want you to carry that on your conscience." In that moment, I felt both protective and betrayed. Protective, because he was my father and I loved him, and I didn't want to see my family torn apart. Betrayed, because he had placed me in a position I never asked for. His words made it clear, this was now my secret as much as his. Whether I wanted to or not, I was part of it. From then on, silence became my shield. Every time my mother asked where he was when he came home late, I swallowed the truth and let her accept his excuses. Every time he smiled at me across the dinner table, I felt the unspoken pact tighten between us. I carried the knowledge in my chest like a hidden scar, one I could never show anyone. But the silence came at a cost. I started to see my mother differently, not because she had changed, but because I knew something she didn't. Watching her pour coffee for him in the mornings, laughing at his stories, believing in the stability of their marriage, it broke something inside me. I wasn't just keeping my father's secret anymore. I was protecting her from a reality she didn't deserve. And that responsibility was too heavy for me, but I bore it anyway. There were nights when I lay awake, staring at the ceiling, wondering if I should tell her, if ripping off the bandage would be better than pretending nothing was wrong. But then I would hear my father moving about the house, or I'd remember the sadness in his eyes when he asked me to keep his confidence. And I couldn't do it. I couldn't be the one to break her heart, and I couldn't betray him either. That was the cruelest part of all. Loving them both meant betraying them both. Whichever choice I made, someone would suffer. And so, I chose silence. I chose to carry the weight quietly, believing I was protecting them, even as the S. Living with the secret became less like holding on to a single truth and more like carrying an entire second life. Each day was divided into two versions of reality. The one everyone else lived in, where my parents were just an ordinary couple, and the one I inhabited alone, where I knew the cracks that no one else could see. It was exhausting, walking that line without ever slipping. Over time, my father grew more comfortable in my silence. He didn't mention what I had seen again, but he didn't need to. His behavior toward me began to change in subtle ways. He looked at me differently, with a softness that felt almost like gratitude, as if I had proven myself worthy of trust. Sometimes, when he left the house late at night, he would glance in my direction before leaving, and I knew that he knew I wouldn't say anything. Without ever asking, I had become his accomplice. What unsettled me most was the way he occasionally let little pieces slip, small fragments of his hidden world. He would sigh and tell me that marriage was complicated, that love could take many forms, that life wasn't always as black and white as it seemed. At times, he even spoke warmly of a friend, without naming her, describing qualities that made him light up in ways I rarely saw when he spoke about my mother. He didn't say too much, but enough for me to understand who he meant. I hated hearing it, and yet I listened, because he wanted me to. Because he trusted me to. That trust felt twisted. On the surface, it made me feel chosen, special even, like I was closer to him than anyone else in the family. But beneath it was the ache of knowing that this closeness was built on betrayal. Every word he shared drove a wedge deeper between me and my mother, not because she had done anything wrong, but because my silence forced me to keep her at a distance. I couldn't look into her eyes the same way, couldn't laugh freely at her jokes, couldn't accept her love without remembering the truth she didn't know. There were moments when I almost slipped. Once, when she asked why he had been late again, I opened my mouth to tell her, but the words lodged in my throat. I watched her eyes, full of trust, and I felt like a coward. Another time, when she spoke lovingly about how loyal he was, my chest tightened so painfully I had to excuse myself just to breathe. But still, I said nothing. The guilt began to creep into every part of my life. At school, with friends, even when I was alone, I carried an unease I couldn't shake. I stopped sleeping well, tossing and turning with the weight of words I never spoke. I grew quieter, more withdrawn, unable to explain why. No one knew the truth, and no one could know. My father seemed oblivious to the toll it took on me. To him, it was enough that I kept his secret. He didn't see how it changed me, how it carved something heavy into my chest that would never really go away. He saw my silence as loyalty. But to me, it felt like chains. And yet, I couldn't bring myself to break free. I loved him too much. Even as I resented him for making me carry what wasn't mine to carry, I still wanted to protect him. He was my father, and despite everything, I still saw him as the man who had once been my hero. That was the cruel paradox I lived with. The same man who had given me so much love and guidance was also the one who had placed the heaviest burden on my shoulders. I told myself it was temporary, that maybe the situation would resolve itself, that perhaps one day he would end things and I would no longer have to live between two worlds. But deep down, I knew that even if the affair ended, the memory of it, and the role I played in hiding it, would never really leave me. The closest the truth ever came to unraveling happened on a day that seemed ordinary at first. My mother had gone through some receipts in my father's jacket pocket. Small slips of paper that he must have forgotten to hide. One of them was from a restaurant far across town, a place I knew he had visited more than once. She frowned, confused, asking aloud why he would be dining there when it wasn't anywhere near his office. For a moment, my entire body froze. I felt the walls closing in, the possibility that this was it, that the secret would finally burst open into the light. Before she could question further, I spoke. I don't even remember the exact words, but I remember the rush of adrenaline as I lied. I said something about him taking me there once, about how maybe he had gone back with colleagues, something harmless enough to erase her suspicion. She accepted my explanation with a small nod, tucking the receipt away, and the moment passed. But inside, I was trembling. I had protected him again, and in doing so, I had deceived her. The guilt afterward was unbearable. That night, he pulled me aside. I don't know if he realized how close she had come to finding out, but he looked at me with an intensity that made me feel sick. He didn't thank me outright, but the gratitude was in his eyes, in the way he squeezed my shoulder before walking away. I should have felt proud of saving him, but instead I felt complicit in something that had twisted every part of me. The breaking point came not in an explosion, but in quiet exhaustion. I realized I had been carrying his secret for so long that it had seeped into everything. How I thought, how I felt, how I related to both of them. I was no longer just his child. I was his confidant, his shield, his accomplice. And I hated it. I hated that I could no longer look at my mother without guilt, or look at him without suspicion. What had once been a simple bond of love between a father and child had become a pact written in silence and betrayal. Eventually, the affair ended. I never knew the details, whether the woman left, whether my father decided it was too dangerous to continue, or whether he simply grew tired. One day, the late nights stopped, the phone calls faded, and the scent of unfamiliar perfume no longer followed him through the door. To the outside world, it was as though nothing had ever happened. My parents went on with their lives, and my mother never seemed to suspect a thing. But for me, nothing returned to normal. The secret didn't vanish with the woman's absence. It remained lodged inside me, a reminder of the years I had spent carrying someone else's betrayal. Even now, when I look back, I realize how much it shaped me, how it taught me about the fragility of trust, the complexity of love, and the painful cost of silence. I never told my mother. I never told anyone. To this day, it exists only in my memory, a private truth that I've locked away. I loved my father, and part of me still does, but that love will always be complicated, tangled up with the knowledge of who he really was when no one else was watching. Sometimes, I wonder what would have happened if I had spoken up, if I had chosen honesty instead of silence. Maybe it would have destroyed my family, maybe it would have broken my mother's heart, maybe it would have forced my father to face his choices. But I didn't. I carried it quietly, convincing myself that protecting them was the right thing, even as it left scars on me that I still carry. This is the secret I've never told anyone. The story of how my father entrusted me with his betrayal, and how I lived with that truth alone. It's a story not about what happened between him and another woman, but about what happened between him and me, the way one secret bound us together, changed us both, and left me with a weight I will never fully put down.